21st Century Entrepreneurship with Martin Piskarik.
The first surprise that people have when they meet me is when I start talking about growth or growing an organization. I explain to them that there's a science to it, and it's called the growth sciences. And that's usually one of the biggest first surprises people have when they first meet me. And I myself was first surprised to discover this as well, although it's a brand new emerging topic. And it originates from something even more popularly known as growth hacking, which has shifted from essentially hacking to an actual science that's used by Fortune 500s, unicorns, startup companies, corporations at all different levels. And when I first started this several years back, it was roughly about 1.5% to 2% of Fortune 1000s were actually tapping into the growth sciences, whereas 11% of corporates, 21% of startups, and unicorns at 97.8% being the leaders when it comes to understanding the growth sciences. And they're usually the best example to understand from the DNA of what it takes to really grow an organization. So even some of the largest companies on the planet learn from them and try to mimic what they do. They're not always the best example in many ways, but they got it in their DNA, and I think there's a lot to learn from it. I'm Nader Sabry. I'm a strategist, innovator, and entrepreneur. For the last 25 years, I've been shaping organizations around exponential growth. That's everything from raising $120 million for startup companies that I have built myself and indirectly funded by helping build startup companies, to working with some of the world's most innovative governments in shaping innovation and policy for the future, and working with some of the world's top strategy companies to help Fortune 500s identify what does the future look like and how they can grow exponentially in what is about to come and what we would see in a slightly turbulent world, to put it politely, in today's context.
Get me out of here. It's time to follow you into the sun. Golden skies lead me down 101. Your city lights reflecting in my eyes. Oh baby, don't you know that I would?
I'm here today to help you understand the growth sciences, and my goal is to let you understand that something like this does exist, and there is a way that anybody listening to this today can master. You don't have to be a knee-deep expert into this space. You can be just an everyday entrepreneur, and I'm going to walk you through some live examples with resources that you can go to after the show. You can learn from directly yourself and start to master it yourself. So in the 1990s, I started as an entrepreneur. I was actually quite lucky. I was in the right place at the right time, but many of us are in the right place and the right time and don't know what to do with it. And I learned the hard way. And one of the things that I had learned very early on, it's something that you are either experiencing or on the verge of breaking. And that is where you are on the educational path as an entrepreneur to learn how to succeed in what you're doing, learn from others. And you obviously go out there and read books, and you listen to podcasts, and you would tap into consultants, and you do the training. And what happened is that I didn't really end up getting results like millions of other people. And I didn't understand why initially, until I started looking much, much deeper into some of the successes I did have, even if it was on a smaller scale. And what I discovered was that it wasn't about the formula that somebody's selling to me saying, this is the way to do things. It worked for them, and it may work for some people who are similar to them, but it ain't going to work for everybody. And that's the majority of us. And that's when I took control of my own success path as an entrepreneur and as a professional strategist. in developing my own formula. And when you go through my training or you read one of my books, the first thing that I lay out as a promise to you is that I'm going to help you identify your growth formula. And that's probably the most important thing that you're ever going to learn working with me. And the reason that that's important, I'll put it in the form of a story. The number one thing that clients come to me with is we're benchmarking our competitors and we want to beat them on this metric. And when I challenge them, I say, well, what if that wasn't the right metric? What if there was a metric that nobody else is measuring, or a metric that nobody else is utilizing in a much different way? Would you be willing and open to explore it? And as a conversation, many people would be interested to have the exploratory conversation, but actually actioning it, which is where the science of growth comes into play, is a whole different ballgame. And that's what we're going to tap into today. So in the early 90s, as an entrepreneur, I founded Canada Online, one of the world's first internet service providers. You can tell from the name, obviously, who I was competing with. It was America Online, just in the Canadian market. So, take all the guesswork out of that. And it was a very, very interesting and enlightening time, anyone who's been in the technology and innovation space, because that was the golden era of where a lot of the things that we see today were actually built. And it's a little difficult to trace it back, but if you've been there, you know exactly what I'm talking about. When I built this internet service provider, there was no precedence to what I was building. There was nothing in front of me that was able to give me a benchmark or an expert that can guide me to do this, because nobody had done this before. And that was the beginning of my journey. I found myself always at the forefront of abstract situations. And as a good strategist, you would naturally thrive in an abstract situation, but know how to structure it and create opportunity of it. And that's where I started learning about the growth sciences. It obviously wasn't known to me like that at that point. But I learned it throughout building this company. We were to go public on IPO, and during that process, we got bought out, which we didn't plan it to be like that, but that was the best thing that could ever happen to us, because right after that, the dot bomb had taken place and everything had just crashed, and technology was toxic and innovation was seen as a poison. Believe it or not, it's so difficult to believe in today's world, but that's where we were in year 2000. So I continued building technology companies between Canada and Silicon Valley. Most of them were failures because of the timing. I built a first generation AI company to tackle the venture capital industry and finance, and initially did well, but we burned through $1 million a month. We'd raised $9 million, so you can guess from the simple arithmetic in 9 months, we weren't able to raise the next amount of money, and so we were stuck and we didn't do very well. And this kind of repeated. And then while I was in the Valley, I actually met an individual who got me into the lobbying industry, which was a complete departure to what I was doing prior to. And that was because of how he had seen I was building strategy for the tech industry, and he wanted me to help represent the tech industry in the corridors of power and tapping into government. And so that opened up a whole new area of interest to me and understanding how that works. And so I continued doing that. I ended up moving halfway across the world, which is to Dubai. Nobody knew what that was in those days. Becoming the chief strategist of the economic department, working directly with the ruler of Dubai and shaping it as my own product, which was completely crazy. It's like a dream come true, being able to shape a place at a time when the canvas is just wide open. And so I did that for a good decade. And while doing that, I learned a lot about public policy. And what public policy actually taught me was why people make certain decisions and how they affect the growth of an organization. And when I say organization, I'm not just talking about companies. I'm also talking about governments, nonprofits. They too have to grow. Their goals may be different, but they also use the growth sciences. So shortly after doing that, I founded the FDI office, Foreign Direct Investment Office, purely out of a reform program that was designed at the end of kind of 2007-8. And it was designed to transform the Emirate of Dubai into the world's #1 destination for FDI, which is what we are today. And in doing that, we had to growth hack the economy, right? We had to use the growth sciences to shape this economy that you see today, that you hear about all over the world. It didn't just randomly happen like that. There is a very deliberate, intentional strategy behind it, and the growth sciences is what we use to do that. So after doing that, shortly, I was recruited by A.T. Kearney, one of the top strategy firms, as their head of innovation and thought leadership, to work with Fortune 1000 companies to help them do exactly that, to look at the future, understand what does the future look like to the decisions I need to make today, and how do I grow in a changing environment. So after doing that, I got to be honest with you, I got sick and tired of working for corporations and governments. I went back to my roots of being an entrepreneur and founded a company called Times5, which became the 43rd company in history to be certified by NASA in the NASA Space Certified Technology Transfer Program. And this was probably one of the most enriching experiences I've ever had. It was the only time that I've ever worked in a situation where I had where the precedence of science before me was unknown, and everything that would move you forward was your ability to believe in the possibilities of what would be in front of you. And this is something that came naturally to me, but was throughout my life was actually held against me in many ways. And I'm sure many of you listening to this would understand. And normally at the core of it, you'd be anti-status quo, and you're not anti-status quo for the sake of being anti-status quo. It's because the things that you see around you don't make sense, but everybody seems to agree to it. And so as an entrepreneur, naturally, you want to solve these things, right? Why is it the way it is? How can it be done better? Why is nobody solving this? And you find yourself with that hunch in which you can change things. And I found myself exactly back to that same instance where I was in the mid 90s, but just transforming a whole different industry. And I continued doing that. My company was bought out at the end of 2017-18. And that's when I started on the journey of the growth sciences. How I ended up on that journey was a lot of entrepreneurs who had been working with me for years would always ask, how did you come up with that? How did you do it? Can you teach me how to do this? And a lot of them were starting to talk about growth hacking. It was just brand new at that time. It was very trendy. I started looking a little bit deeper into it, and I realized, oh, wow, man, I've been doing this for a number of years, but it's just not documented or structured in a way that somebody else can replicate it or learn how to do it. And that's when I wrote my first book, which is Ready, Set, Growth Hack. This yellow book right here. And so this became the blueprint, and it became a bestseller. So it was used by Fortune 500s, unicorns, startup companies, governments were picking this up. I have organizations that would buy it for every member of the organization to transform the mindset, actually, of people in the organization towards growth. And what it did is it helped structure the understanding of things like, what is the difference between exponential versus incremental growth? And most of us have been trained to work in the frame of incremental growth. So that's equivalent to you're looking at next year and, hey, we want to increase by 3 to 5 or even 15%. And in some industries, that sounds like a massive amount of growth. And when you add the value to what that 3 or 15% would look like, it could be in multi-billions of dollars. However, it's not exponential. And that's where organizations need to be looking to understand how to grow in the future. And the premises of exponential is growing in multiples. And when you're consistently measuring against the same things everybody else is doing, you can't grow in multiples because the grid is too packed. So you have to step off the grid, and you need to start looking at things that nobody else would be looking at. It's a lot like things like the concept of blue ocean versus the red ocean. And it's the same kind of concept, but everyone has a little different way of approaching it, and I approach it in a completely different way. Every growth strategy that I have developed or worked with an organization developed all comes from the unknown. That's actually where the growth is, and most people are scared of the unknown, the abstract parts of where the world operates, but that's where the actual opportunities are. And walking people through that is a very challenging process. So there are a few principles that I've learned going across it. Then the first thing is something called the growth dilemma, which I learned very early on in my corporate career, which was that every one of us has a dilemma at the beginning of the day, the week, the month, quarter, and the year. And that dilemma is that I have these goals that are much greater than the resources I have. So the dilemma is I have two options in front of me. Either I understand how growth works and I can growth hack it and use the growth sciences to figure it out, or I wing it. And as you can tell, most people wing it. There's a whole culture around winging it. And that's where there's a whole science behind winging it. Let me put it like that. That's not necessarily the best or the right way to go about things, but we've all been there. That's where the growth dilemma comes in. The next part was a principle which is called the boardroom ego. So the boardroom ego was, I'd get hired by these fantastically run organizations. They've got this growth problem. I come in, first day I'm there, there's the whole boardroom, and we're talking about the growth problem, and everybody seems to have the solution, which is so interesting, because if they had the solution, why would you hire me? Why are we there to begin with? It's very comical in many ways. And what I used to do, and still do it, of course, till today, to get over that, and I would explain to them, there's this thing called the boardroom ego, and everyone would kind of look at me funny, and I say, okay, so how we get past this is in a very simple way. There's this one statement I'm going to read to you, and this statement we're all going to agree to, okay? It's going to put us all on the same page, and that statement is, I don't know, okay? And when we start with this statement that I don't know, the only thing in front of you is experimentation. The only thing in front of you is experimentation. And when you come from that clean slate, of thinking, when we're trying to solve some of these, highly complex growth problems, this gives us the ability to start seeing things that we haven't explored, or would like to explore but never had the opportunity to. And there's a structure to it, and that's what I teach in Ready, Set, Growth Hack. There's 3 phases in the growth sciences. First part is the growth problem. So I use like a 300-point diagnostic tool to pinpoint what the real growth problem is. The second part is the growth experiments, and then finally growth extensions. And under experiments is where the art of the science of it happens, and the art of it happens in the extension part. And we run, quick, simple, low cost experiments that help us quickly find out how to explore different things. And you can learn this, and I'll point you to a really good resource, which is in my second book. You know what? I'm going to keep you hanging on that one. I'm going to give it to you in a bit. So keep hanging in there. The last part is the growth extensions, and that's where you scale. And this is the part where 90% of failure takes place, because there's automation scale, and then there's full scale operations. And full scale operations is where the real failure happens, which is at the very, very end of the process, when people are very confident that when they take something to scale and operate it at a full scale operations, it'll work the same way when it was an experiment in the lab. And you get many surprises that it doesn't necessarily operate the same way, and it needs some very serious adjustments. In organizations where they're agile to adjustments, the likelihood of getting past, or getting past this failure rate obviously reduces. But if you stick to the same way, obviously the failure rate continues to go higher, and it's a very sensitive point. And when I do this training for a lot of organizations, they all kind of jump up and put their hands up. This is exactly where we had a problem, where we got to this point and went to full scale operations. It just didn't work the way we wanted it to. And there's a whole set of ways that I teach in my book how we do that. Now back to the resource that I was going to talk to you about experimentation. So I wrote a second book, which is called Growth Thinking. And this is a growth methodology. It is used in, it's being used at like Stanford, Harvard. It's not part of their official curriculum. It's part of the tool set, because I've had several engagements with them. I've even had a few articles written at Harvard Business Review, and I did a webinar with Harvard Business Review because of the great interest in the growth sciences back in September. What it boils down to is it's a visual way to understand how a growth strategy would look like, and then you'd implement it, and then you document what went right and wrong, and we have a systematic way of doing that, and then you'd repeat, and you'd be able to journal it through this methodology. So I challenged myself with this methodology and created something called the 10-Day Growth Hacking Challenge. And so if you go to my YouTube channel, you can type in my name, Nader Sabry, and 10-Day Growth Hacking Challenge, and you're going to find we have this $1 million challenge broken down into $10,000 challenges, where we have worked with 2 of the world's largest incubators or accelerators to recruit some of the creme of the creme. And we intentionally look at people who are entrepreneurs from all different walks of life, different geography, different stage in the business cycle, different industry. And the point isn't to go to the challenge and for you to learn from, let's say in the healthcare industry or fintech industry, and you go find a fintech entrepreneur, healthcare entrepreneur. That's not the idea. The idea is that for you to learn the mechanics of how an entrepreneur in the media industry, how you can take that and apply it in your industry, whether it be fintech or healthcare. And you need to kind of watch it like that, and your mind will start to open up to some of the crazy things that can happen, and how you can see people with very little resources can start growing exponentially almost overnight. Now, it's not an easy process, but you can figure it out. And so through this challenge, we have 5 contenders per season. Each one of them has 5 episodes that you can watch. They're structured, and you'll see them walking through the process. Now, people first, when they start going there, they're like, how much do you charge for this? And I said, the cool thing about it is that we don't charge a thing. It's open education. All you have to do is just put in your time and learn. At the same time, on my YouTube channel, you can learn a lot about certain different tutorials about what is growth hacking, how does it work, some of the tools. People always ask me about tools. So we've got this thing called the 20-minute tool test, which will teach you actually how to find the best tool rather than being told what is the best tool. So it's one of these traps that you got to be very careful of. So this is an area where you can learn a lot, and this is where usually the point where I always tell people, like, get educated, understand what this topic is about, pick up the book, read about it, go through the challenge, see how it works, and start to see how you would be able to bring that into your business. One of the most significant transformations I've seen across all our contenders was their ability to transform their ability to bridge the gap between idea and action. And as simple as this sounds, this is actually literally the reason why certain people and organizations will outgrow another one. The closer the distance between an idea and action is, the faster and more resilient you become. It's a muscle that you need to build with time, and only through experimentation and approaching these things in a different mindset will you be able to figure out. It is painful in the beginning, like anything else, so no pain, no gain, but not impossible by any means. You'll be able to figure it out. So the growth sciences as a field is the number one super skill of the future. And I'm going to give you a little bit of background to that, because those of you who are kind of tuning in want to, like, hey, like, where can I hire a growth hacker? Where can I learn it? So back in about approximately 2020, a growth hacker in the UK, I know, approached me, and one of his clients wanted to sign a non-disclosure agreement purely for me to look at some data. And so they were questioning some of the data I had. And so what I do is industry analysis on the growth sciences sector. And I had done a count on how many growth scientists or growth hackers existed. And at that time, it was about 6,000, I think was the number. And then they're talking to me about a year later, and what do you think that number is? And I said, well, it's about double, but we need to do a reassessment. But it's not, it sounds like a lot, but it's not many, because we're talking about 9,000 to 12,000. So then we started looking into this model about the future of skills and the talent that will be in high demand. And growth is the number one super skill of the future. And there's about 1 million growth hackers that will be needed. It's actually more than that now, but about 1 million growth hackers will be needed by 2030. And the gap in that demand continues to grow, because the way that organizations need to grow between now and 2030 is, you can see how the world is going, is changing dramatically day by day. And so this different mindset and this science needs to be applied for organizations that need to understand how to do that. That's not just startup companies. That's also your Fortune 500s that need to figure that out. So this field is a growing field. There's roughly 120% premium paid for growth scientists in today's market. And that assessment we did about a year ago, and I'm sure that that's gone up to what number, I don't know. I mean, we try to keep these industry reports up to date. If you go to growth thinking, mygrowththinking.com, which is the growth thinking book, on that blog, you can see several of the industry reports and data that we provide based on the industry. You can learn about all kinds of things, everything from some of the predominant characteristics of the mindset, things like the T-shaped talent, different talent, different skill sets that apply to this field. There's just a ton of stuff that you can go at and figure out.
Familiar roads with unfamiliar feelings, holding tight on the steering wheel to keep myself from reeling.
So to learn more about the growth sciences, you can start it by going to my website, which is nadersabry.com. There's additionally a ton of free resources. They're worth thousands of dollars that you can get. You can go to my YouTube channel, just type in my name, Nader Sabry with a Y, and it'll pop up. Do subscribe, and then you get access to a ton of content that will teach you a ton of things. On my blog also, which is mygrowthinking.com, which is the second book I was mentioning, you can go there as well. There is a ton of content about the industry itself. So everything from, how 86% of growth agencies fail and why, to 76% of marketing funnels actually are dysfunctional. And we actually break down the DNA. So you can take a look at that and use that blueprint. So there's just a ton of content that you can use absolutely free. They're worth thousands of dollars. We've got training on My Growth Thinking. So if you buy the book, the training is worth about $400, which you just scan on the book and you would tap into a whole set of other training. So I always push the idea of just education, and create your own formula. If I was to leave you with one message, do not follow everyone else's formula, no matter how attractive or how vested you might be into it. You need to find your own formula, and you need to be in that mindset where you are the master of your own universe. You will create your own destiny, but you can only do that with your own formula. No one can create it for you. No one can dictate it for you. No one can even influence it. It has to be 100% you. So reflect on that, and then use the education, the free education that I've made available for you to shape your mind about where your next big growth hack might be.
21st Century Entrepreneurship with Martin Piskarik.
Imagine a space where triumphs, trials, and tales of entrepreneurship come alive. Welcome to the 21st Century Entrepreneurship Podcast, a gold awarded journey hosted by Martin Piskarik, connecting with listeners in 95 countries and ranking in the top 0.5% of all podcasts. Join our exclusive community, elevate your perspective, and embark on the path to success.